It is, it's actually really funny to think about. Right now, as you're listening to this deep dive,
Yep.
maybe you're, I don't know, sitting in traffic, or you're just at your desk.
Right, we're taking a walk.
Yeah, taking a walk.
Yeah.
You probably feel pretty stationary, right? You feel
Okay.
solid. You feel
Yeah.
completely still. But the truth is, if you ask the world's greatest physicists or, ancient philosophers or even modern medical researchers, you're not still at all.
No, not even a little bit.
You are, quite literally, an ocean of motion.
It's a really profound realization when you finally internalize it. Because down to the deepest subatomic level, absolutely nothing about you is at rest.
Or the chair you're sitting on.
Exactly. The chair, your phone, everything. The electrons in your atoms are orbiting at these just incomprehensible speeds. The molecules that make up your cells are constantly oscillating. So it's all this chaotic, beautiful symphony of movement.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because today we are taking on a mission that is, frankly, going to fundamentally change how you view your reality.
I really believe it will, yeah.
Our focus today is on a single unifying principle, the law of vibration. And we have a massive stack of sources today. We're going to trace this concept from its metaphysical roots, in antiquity, right through to the hard mathematical physics of resonance.
And energy transfer.
Right. And then we're going to look at the physical human body, like how mechanical vibrations actually build bone mass and how sound frequencies can selectively destroy cancer cells.
Which is just mind-blowing data.
It really is. And finally, we'll venture into this realm of mental induction, looking at how your thoughts act as literal, contagious radio waves in the physical space around you. So by the end of this, you will never look at your thoughts or your voice the same way again.
So let's start at the recorded beginning of this concept, I think. We have to look at a text called the Kybalion.
Right, published in 1908.
Yeah, 1908, by these individuals who called themselves the Three Initiates. And it claims to synthesize the ancient Hermetic teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, which is a legendary figure from antiquity.
A very mysterious figure.
Yeah, very. And the book outlines 7 Hermetic principles. But the one we are zeroing in on today is the third one, the principle of vibration.
And the text for that specific principle is incredibly direct.
It really is. It simply states nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates.
Which sounds simple on the surface, right? Almost like, I don't know, a piece of poetic philosophy.
Yeah, it sounds like poetry. But when you map that statement onto what we know now, the implications are staggering. What's fascinating here is that while the Kybalion wraps this in, mystical, esoteric language, it perfectly mirrors the underlying architecture of reality that we wouldn't mathematically prove for decades.
Right, because we have analysis from researchers like Nicholas E. Chappell. And he points out that this principle of vibration actually has strong roots in the 18th century philosophy of David Hartley.
And more importantly, it aligns seamlessly with modern quantum physics.
Yeah, because when we talk about wave-particle duality, we're talking about the fact that an electron isn't just it's not a tiny billiard ball sitting there.
No, not at all.
It exists as a wave of probabilities until it's observed.
Precisely. Or if you consider quantum fluctuations, where particles literally pop in and out of existence in a vacuum. I mean, a vacuum isn't empty. It's this boiling sea of vibrational energy.
Which is exactly what the Kybalion described.
Exactly. The universe, at its most fundamental, irreducible level, is just an interconnected web of vibrating energy fields.
Which I think is the perfect jumping-off point for a more modern, practical interpretation of this idea.
Yeah.
Because we've been looking at the teachings of the late Bob Proctor.
Specifically, his framework around the 3 spiritual laws.
Right. Now, for anyone listening who is familiar with the self-development world, you already know the premise of manifestation. You know the law of attraction, popularized by that book, The Secret.
Sure, yeah.
The general idea is, think positive thoughts, focus on the reality you want, and you'll attract it.
But Proctor kind of takes a sledgehammer to that basic understanding.
He really does. He argues that the law of attraction is actually a secondary law. It is just a byproduct. The law of vibration is the primary cause.
That is a crucial distinction, and it's honestly where most people get tripped up. Proctor states that thoughts are electric and emotions are magnetic.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I have that. Thoughts are electric, emotions are magnetic.
Yes, and together they create a measurable electromagnetic field, which is your vibrational frequency. So the universe doesn't respond to the words you say.
It doesn't care about the vision board on your wall.
Exactly. It doesn't look at the vision board. It responds to your energetic signature.
Yeah.
As he puts it, you don't attract what you want. You attract what you are.
Okay. I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Because, I mean, I know plenty of people who have tried this, who have sat on their couch, closed their eyes, intensely visualized a different life, and absolutely nothing happened.
Right.
Like if I sit here right now and just repeat the phrase, I am a millionaire, over and over, no one is dropping a bag of cash on my head.
Sadly, no.
So if my thoughts are electric, and I'm generating the millionaire thought, what is the mechanical disconnect?
Well, the mechanical disconnect is phase cancellation, essentially.
Yeah.
The universe doesn't speak English, it speaks frequency.
Okay.
When you say the words, I am abundant, that's a conscious, surface-level cognitive action. But what is your underlying physiological state doing in that exact moment?
Well, if I'm desperately trying to manifest money to pay rent, my physiological state is probably drenched in cortisol.
Exactly.
My heart rate is slightly elevated. I'm feeling fear.
And your body is physically broadcasting that fear, that doubt, that desperation. And remember, those emotions are the magnetic component.
Right.
So your conscious mind is putting out this really weak electrical signal of abundance. But your subconscious, your physiological state, is broadcasting a massive, booming magnetic signal of lack.
So that lower frequency of desperation just overwhelms the conscious thought.
Completely. You are vibrating at lack. You cannot fake a vibration because it's a holistic output of your entire nervous system.
So it's not a magic spell. It's a bioenergetic output. You can't just shout the lyrics to a cheerful song if your internal radio dial is, like, permanently rusted onto a heavy metal station.
That's a great analogy.
The music playing is going to be heavy metal. And from what I understand from the sources, that rusted dial is our subconscious mind.
That's the perfect way to look at it. The subconscious mind controls roughly 95% of our actions, our automatic beliefs, and our emotional reflexes.
95%, that's huge.
It's almost everything. Therefore, your subconscious acts as your vibrational set point. It's the thermostat for your frequency. If you want to change your external reality, you have to change the set point, which means you have to rewire the subconscious architecture.
It's not a logical exercise you can just think your way out of.
No, you can't outthink it.
So mechanically, neurologically, how do we rewire that set point? Because Proctor's methodology outlines a few specific requirements.
Right, the first being repetition.
Repetition, yeah. The subconscious learns through repeated exposure, which slowly alters those neural pathways.
And the second is intense emotional involvement. A thought without an emotion is inert. It doesn't generate that magnetic pull we talked about.
And the third is gratitude.
Yes, and we really should pause on gratitude. Because biologically, gratitude is incredibly potent. It shifts the autonomic nervous system out of sympathetic fight or flight and into parasympathetic rest and digest.
It literally alters your heart rate variability.
It does. It alters your heart coherence, which creates a highly ordered, stable electromagnetic field around the heart.
That makes perfect sense. It lowers the static.
Exactly.
And the final step Proctor emphasizes is acting as if. Behaving physically and emotionally like the person who already has what they desire.
What Neville Goddard called living from the end.
Right. You adopt the physiological state of the wish fulfilled before the external environment actually reflects it.
Which is difficult, because our senses are constantly screaming at us to react to the present reality.
Yeah, the rent is still due today.
Exactly. So to manage this, we can look at two higher spiritual laws that work in tandem with vibration: the law of divine timing and the law of soul alignment.
Right, the idea that delays are preparations, not denials, which, I mean, it sounds like a great bumper sticker, but what is actually happening there under the surface?
Think about it biologically. When you are desperately trying to force an outcome, you are operating from ego and urgency.
And urgency triggers a stress response.
Cortisol spikes. Your perceptual field narrows. Your vibrational frequency becomes erratic and dense. So the law of divine timing is essentially the understanding that natural growth requires a gestation period.
Okay.
By accepting that a delay is necessary preparation, you drop the resistance. You lower your cortisol. You return to a restorative, coherent frequency. You stop fighting the current and allow the phase alignment to happen naturally.
And the law of soul alignment is similar, right? It's the concept that you don't manifest the superficial things your ego wants just to impress others.
Yeah.
You manifest what your deeper architecture actually needs for its evolution.
Precisely. If you try to force a manifestation that conflicts with your core values, your subconscious will sabotage it because the frequencies are dissonant.
It's all about resonance and dissonance. Now, I can hear the skeptics right now,
Oh, I'm sure.
because it is incredibly easy to relegate all of this to New Age philosophy. The word vibration has been so hijacked by wellness influencers that it almost lost its meaning.
It really has.
But what happens when we strip away the manifestation terminology and look at this exact same concept through the cold, hard, unforgiving lens of physical mechanics? Let's talk about gravity, mass, springs, and engineering.
Let's do it. When we look at the standard mechanical vibrations engineering texts, vibration is stripped of all mysticism.
It's just math.
Pure math. It has a rigid mathematical definition. Vibration is any motion that repeats itself after an interval of time. The study of this phenomenon is the absolute bedrock of physics.
We have Galileo determining the relationship between the length of a pendulum and its period of oscillation.
Right, and Sir Isaac Newton laying down the foundational laws of motion and defining mass.
And crucially, we have the French mathematician Joseph Fourier. His work is so foundational here.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Fourier proved that any periodic function, no matter how chaotic or complex it appears, can be mathematically broken down into a series of simple sines and cosines.
Fourier transforms are vital. They prove that complex realities are just stacked layers of simple vibrations. But to understand what is actually happening mechanically when a physical object vibrates, we need to look at two required properties:
Mass and elasticity.
mass and elasticity.
Right. Because if something doesn't have mass, it can't hold kinetic energy. And if it doesn't have elasticity, it can't store potential energy.
Exactly. Mechanical vibration is simply an endless, alternating exchange of energy. It's a dance between kinetic energy, which is the energy of active movement, and potential energy, which is the stored energy waiting to be released.
Like the tension in a stretched rubber band.
Yes. When an external force displaces an object, its internal elastic forces try to snap it back to its original equilibrium position.
To visualize this, let's look at a classic playground swing. But let's, freeze frame the physics.
Okay, I like this.
When you push someone on a swing, they travel forward and upward. At the absolute peak of that arc, right before gravity pulls them backward, there's a microsecond where they are completely motionless.
It's just frozen in the air.
Right. In that frozen microsecond, their kinetic energy, their movement, is absolute zero. But their potential energy is at its maximum peak. Gravity is practically vibrating with the potential to pull them down.
And then the swing drops.
It accelerates downward.
Right.
And at the exact bottom of the arc, when the swing is perfectly perpendicular to the ground, they are traveling at maximum velocity.
Right.
At that moment, potential energy is zero because gravity can't pull them any lower, but kinetic energy is maxed out. And their momentum carries them up the other side, converting that kinetic movement back into stored potential energy until they stop again.
And that constant rhythmic conversion is a vibration.
That's all it is.
And this mechanical reality brings us to the phenomenon of resonance, which in acoustics and physics, resonance is the physical proof of like attracts like.
It's a mechanism by which energy transfers invisibly between two objects.
Exactly. And the tuning fork experiment is the ultimate undeniable proof of this concept.
Walk us through that, because it's so visually striking.
It really is. Imagine you have two identical tuning forks. We'll call them fork A and fork B. Because of their specific mass and their geometric shape, they are both engineered to vibrate at the exact same natural frequency. Let's say 440 hertz, an A note.
Okay.
If you strike fork A with a rubber mallet, it begins to vibrate and emit sound waves. Now, if you bring fork A near fork B, without them ever physically touching,
They never touch.
they never touch. Fork B will suddenly begin to vibrate and hum entirely on its own.
Just by existing in the same physical space.
Yeah.
But how exactly? What is physically pushing the metal of the second fork?
The sound waves from fork A are alternating bands of high and low air pressure. Because fork B shares the exact same physical architecture, it is uniquely vulnerable to those specific pressure waves.
Okay, so the waves hit it.
The waves hit the tines of fork B in perfectly timed increments. Each wave gives the metal a tiny microscopic push right at the precise millisecond it naturally wants to bend anyway.
Oh, it's like pushing someone on a swing at the exact right moment to make them go higher.
Exactly. It's the exact same principle. The energy transfers invisibly through the medium of the air and induces a sympathetic vibration.
So Bob Proctor's assertion that you attract what you are vibrating, it isn't a metaphor. It is the literal mechanism of acoustic and electromagnetic resonance.
Yes.
You are a biological tuning fork, and you induce sympathetic vibrations in the environment that matches your physical architecture.
Yes, but, and this is important, the engineering texts also contain a severe warning about resonance. When a system is subjected to an external force that exactly matches its natural frequency, the amplitude of the vibration becomes excessively large.
The energy keeps stacking.
It stacks and stacks, and if this isn't controlled, it leads to catastrophic mechanical failure.
Like the famous footage of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapsing in 1940.
That is the perfect example. The aeroelastic flutter caused by the wind happened to exactly match the bridge's natural frequency. The bridge absorbed that energy, the swinging amplitude grew larger and larger, and eventually the solid steel and concrete literally tore itself apart.
Wow.
To prevent this, engineers utilized something called damping. Damping is a mechanism designed to safely dissipate vibrational energy, usually by converting it into heat, so the physical structure isn't destroyed.
Like the shock absorbers on your car.
Exactly like shock absorbers.
So we have the metaphysics of energetic fields, and we have the hard physics of mechanical resonance. Let's try to bridge the two. In our research, there's this compelling concept, often summarized by a, quote, widely attributed to Albert Einstein.
Everything is energy, and that's all there is to it.
Right. Match the frequency of the reality you want. This is not philosophy, this is physics. Now, whether he actually said those exact words is debated by historians, but the underlying physics principle is universally accepted. Matter is just highly condensed energy.
And we can actually see this energetic field around living tissue. In 1934, a Russian electrical engineer named Semyon Kybalion discovered a photographic technique that captures this.
Kybalion photography.
Yes, it involves placing an object, like a leaf or a human hand, on a photographic plate and running a high-voltage, high-frequency electrical current through it.
What's actually happening there physically? Why does the object glow in the photos?
Well, the high-voltage field interacts with the moisture and the natural bioelectric field of the subject. It ionizes the gas around the object, creating what physicists call a corona discharge. It results in this brilliant, glowing aura captured on the film, and it's highly sensitive to the subject's state. If a leaf is freshly picked, the discharge is vibrant and wide. As the leaf dies, the captured energy field shrinks and vanishes.
It is a visual representation of the subject's bioelectric vibrational vitality.
Exactly.
Okay, this is where things get really fascinating for me.
Yeah.
We've established that physical objects have mass and elasticity. We know from bridge collapses that mechanical vibration can fundamentally alter or destroy physical structures. So what happens when we bypass the metaphysics, bypass the sound waves, and intentionally force raw mechanical vibrations directly into living human tissue?
This takes us into the biological impact of mechanical frequencies, specifically the field of whole body vibration, or WBV. And the origin story for this research is incredible. It largely stems from the work of Professor Carmela Bosco and the problem of space travel.
Right, the International Space Station.
Yeah.
Because we have these elite astronauts living in microgravity. And without the constant, unrelenting downward force of Earth's gravity forcing their skeleton to bear weight, their bodies start to rapidly dismantle themselves.
It's a huge problem.
They experience severe osteoporosis, bone density loss, and profound muscle atrophy. And what's crazy is they are up there running on specialized treadmills with bungee cords, doing resistance training for 2.5 hours every single day, and they are still losing bone mass.
Yeah, traditional concentric and eccentric muscle exercises simply weren't enough to replicate the specific mechanical stress that Earth's gravity provides.
The body needs the constant microvibrational impact of walking on solid ground to signal the bones to stay dense.
So Professor Bosco and his team developed the NEMES vibrating platform. The goal was to use forced mechanical vibration to simulate the stress of gravity and trick the biology into fortifying itself.
To understand why standing on a shaking piece of metal works, we need to dive into the biology of mechanotransduction and something called the tonic vibration reflex.
Yes.
What is actually happening inside my calf muscle if I stand on one of these plates?
Okay, so when you stand on a vibrating platform, the rapid oscillations moving up and down dozens of times per second create rapid microscopic changes in the length of your muscle tendon complex. Your nervous system is packed with sensory receptors called mechanoreceptors.
So specifically muscle spindles, right?
Specifically muscle spindles. Their entire job is to monitor muscle length and prevent you from tearing a muscle.
So when the plate shakes, the muscle spindle senses the tendon stretching incredibly fast.
Exactly. The mechanoreceptors essentially panic. They register this rapid perturbation as instability. To protect the joint and stabilize the skeleton, they trigger a reflex arc in the spinal cord, causing an intense involuntary muscle contraction to try and dampen the vibratory waves.
So your muscles are firing and flexing automatically without your brain even sending a conscious command to do so. You are contracting maximally just to stay upright.
And the data on this is wild. If we look at EMG activity, which measures the electrical activity of motor neurons firing in the muscle, it skyrockets.
Right. The study with the boxers.
Yes. One study looked at boxers. When they performed a bicep curl using a vibrating dumbbell, their root mean square EMG activity was 200% higher than when they did a standard curl with 5% of their body weight.
200% higher.
Because the vibration recruits almost 100% of the muscle fibers, whereas conscious flexing might only recruit 40 or 50%. In another study, just 10 days of whole-body vibration treatment improved the vertical jump height of elite athletes by 12%.
It forces the neuromuscular system to adapt at an accelerated rate.
It really does.
That is fantastic for athletic performance, but the therapeutic applications are what blew me away in the sources, specifically regarding bone health and joint disease. Let's look at osteoporosis.
Oh.
The mainstream narrative is usually that once your bone density is gone, you can't really get it back. You can only try to slow the decay. How does physically shaking the skeleton actually build bone?
To understand this, we have to look at how bones function at the cellular level. Because bones are not dead chalk. They are dynamic, living tissue, constantly remodeling themselves. You have two main types of cells. Osteoclasts, which act like demolition crews breaking down old, damaged bone tissue.
Okay, demolition crews.
And osteoblasts, which act like construction crews laying down new, fresh bone matrix.
So in a healthy body, the demolition and the construction are perfectly balanced. But in osteoporosis, the osteoclasts are working overtime, destroying bone faster than the osteoblasts can rebuild it, leaving the bones porous like a sponge.
Correct. And this delicate balance is largely governed by a signaling pathway known as the MNKL-OPG system.
Okay, let's break down that alphabet soup. What are NKL and OPG doing?
NKL is a protein. Think of it as the signal that hires more demolition crews. It promotes the formation and activity of osteoclasts. OPG, or osteoprotogerin, is the antagonist. It acts as a decoy receptor that binds to NKL and neutralizes it, essentially telling the demolition crews to go home.
So you want more OPG and less NKL if you want dense bones.
Precisely. And what the clinical research demonstrates is that mechanical vibration acts directly on this system through mechanotransduction.
The physical shaking creates fluid shear stress inside the bone marrow.
Yes. The bone cells physically feel this stress and respond by increasing the expression of OPG and decreasing the expression of NKL.
Wow. So the physical vibration literally flips a genetic... Mechanical force is translated into a chemical signal that stops the destruction of the skeleton. That is a perfect example of physical frequency altering biological reality.
It's incredible.
And what about joints? Because osteoarthritis is a huge issue. The wearing down of the cartilage between the bones.
The vibration has a profound dual effect on articular cartilage. First, the mechanical stimulation forces the chondrocytes, the cells in the cartilage, to release a glycoprotein called lubricin.
Lubricin.
Lubricin acts as a boundary lubricant. It coats the joint surface and reduces friction, acting like fresh oil in a door hinge.
And the second effect?
The second effect involves cell survival. The vibration decreases the expression of caspase-3 within the joint tissue.
Caspase-3, what is that?
Caspase-3 is an executioner enzyme. It plays an essential role in apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. By downregulating caspase-3, the vibratory stress actively prevents the cartilage cells from dying off prematurely. It preserves the structural integrity of the joint.
So listening to all this biology, the obvious question arises, why am I going to the gym? Why am I destroying my knees doing heavy barbell squats? Shouldn't I just buy a vibrating plate, stand on it while watching TV for 20 minutes, and build indestructible bones and massive muscles?
It's a tempting shortcut. But the medical researchers are very careful to position this as a highly complementary therapy, not a total replacement for all functional movement.
Right.
It is a miracle for astronauts, bedridden patients, the elderly, or anyone rehabbing an injury who cannot handle heavy gravitational loads. But if you are healthy, you still need full range of motion resistance training for cardiovascular health and tendon resilience. Furthermore, the physics of the vibration matter immensely.
Right. You can't just sit on a washing machine during the spin cycle and expect to cure osteoporosis.
Exactly. The amplitude, how high the plate moves, and the frequency, how many times per second it moves, must be highly calibrated to your specific mass and bone density. If the frequency is wrong, the tuning fork effect doesn't happen.
The mechanoreceptors don't trigger the OPG release.
Or worse, if the frequency is too aggressive, you could induce microtrauma. You don't want to accidentally find the resonant frequency that acts like the wind on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge.
Okay, so we've seen how gross mechanical vibration, literally shaking the body violently, alters gene expression and bone density. But what about finer, invisible vibrations? What happens when the vibrations aren't coming from a steel motor, but are simply acoustic sound waves in the air, or the electromagnetic frequencies of human emotion?
This moves us into the baseline frequencies of human health. The data provided by organizations like the GEM Foundation gives us some specific measurable metrics. They state that the optimal healthy human body hums at an electromagnetic frequency of 62 to 70 hertz.
Meaning that the aggregate sum of all your cellular activity, your nervous system, your heart rhythm, it all creates a measurable electromagnetic field pulsing between 62 and 70 times a second.
Yes, and what is critical is what happens when that frequency drops. According to their metrics, the frequency of an active common cold or flu infection sits right around 58 hertz.
Oh, wow.
If your body's frequency drops below 50 hertz, you begin to see the onset of chronic diseases. And in cases of terminal illness or critical late-stage disease, the body's frequency plummets down to around 20 hertz.
So an illness isn't just a chemical imbalance. It is literally a state of lowered bioenergetic vibration. The physical structure loses its coherency. And if we know that sound is just a vibration traveling through a medium, how does acoustic sound impact this biology? Let's dive into cymatics.
Cymatics is the science of making sound visible. It was pioneered largely by a Swiss medical doctor and scientist named Dr. Hans Jenny in the 1960s. He performed thousands of experiments where he placed mediums like sand, powder, or liquid on a metal plate and then vibrated the plate using highly specific sound frequencies.
I highly recommend anyone listening go look up videos of this. It looks like CGI. You have this chaotic, random pile of sand on a plate. They turn on a tone generator, and the moment the sound hits a specific frequency, the sand instantly leaps into action and reorganizes itself into an incredibly intricate, beautiful, perfectly symmetrical geometric mandala.
It's beautiful to watch.
And when they change the pitch, the pattern dissolves into chaos for a second, and then snaps into a totally new, even more complex geometric shape. But mechanically, what is pushing the sand into those shapes?
It's all about standing waves. When the plate vibrates, certain areas of the metal bow up and down. These are called antinodes. But other areas of the plate, where the waves intersect and cancel each other out, remain perfectly still. These are called nodes.
Okay.
The vibrating antinodes violently bounce the sand away, and the sand naturally gathers and rests in the calm, stationary nodes. The geometric mandala you are seeing is literally a map of the sound waves' phase cancellations.
So the sound creates a geometric architecture out of chaos. Now, apply that to human biology. The human body is roughly 60 to 70% water.
Right.
If a simple single-tone sound frequency can instantly organize sand and water into complex geometries on a metal plate, imagine what the complex cacophony of external sounds in your environment and the internal sounds of your own body are doing to your cellular structure.
Which brings us to the research of Dr. Alfred Tomatis, a French otolaryngologist, and later the work of musician and researcher Fabien Maman, alongside biologist Helene Sternheimer in the 1970s.
Tomatis' work on the ear is fascinating. He discovered that the ear isn't just for hearing, it's a dynamo. It actually charges the neocortex. High-frequency sounds literally stimulate and energize the brain, while low-frequency, monotonous sounds drain it.
But Maman and Sternheimer took this to the cellular level. They wanted to know which acoustic instruments had the most profound effect on human cells.
And their discovery is truly poetic. They tested various instruments, guitars, xylophones, singing bowls, to see how their frequencies interacted with cellular structures in a petri dish. They found that while instruments had an effect, the human voice had the most powerful, disruptive, and harmonizing vibratory effect of all.
More than a meticulously crafted Tibetan singing bowl, our own vocal cords.
Why?
Because of the complexity of the harmonics and the subtle emotional resonance carried in the human voice, a singing bowl produces a relatively pure, simple sine wave. But the human voice carries fundamental frequencies layered with incredibly rich overtones, modulated by the physiological state of the singer. And here is the truly staggering data point from Maman's research. They found that certain vocal sounds, specific musical notes scaled and emitted by the human voice, could reliably and easily destroy cancer cells in vitro while simultaneously revitalizing healthy cells.
The mechanics of that are mind-bending. Why does the sound shatter the cancer cell but heal the healthy one?
It goes back to structural integrity and resonance. Healthy cells are incredibly flexible, supple, and geometrically coherent. They can absorb the sound wave much like a healthy, well-engineered bridge swaying in the wind.
Right.
Cancer cells, however, are structurally deformed, rigid, and inelastic. When hit with a specific, intense resonant frequency, the cancer cell cannot flex to absorb the energy. The wave amplitude builds until the cellular membrane reaches its elastic limit and literally shatters, while the healthy cell next to it just enjoys the energetic massage.
It's the opera singer shattering the crystal glass, but leaving the plastic cup next to it completely unharmed. And it doesn't stop at acoustic sound. The internal frequency of our emotions alters our cellular geometry just as violently. Let's look at the dark field microscope blood tests conducted by Rebecca Marino.
Yes. For context, a dark field microscope is utilized because it uses a specialized condenser to block direct light, illuminating the sample from the sides. This allows the observer to see live, unstained, moving biological samples like living blood cells against a pitch-black background, highlighting the glowing edges and live behavior of the cells without killing them with chemical stains.
And what Marino saw is a visual confirmation of everything we've discussed. She took live blood samples from subjects experiencing various emotional states. When a person was sick or highly stressed, the red blood cells lost their negative electromagnetic charge.
Which is really bad.
Normally, healthy cells repel each other slightly because of this charge, keeping the blood flowing smoothly. But under stress, they lose that charge and clump together like stacked coins, a state known as rouleau formation. They can't deliver oxygen effectively.
But the most visually arresting part of the research occurred when the subjects were guided into a state of deep, profound sadness.
Right. The cells literally moved erratically and began to physically deform. They elongated and pinched at the ends, taking on the physical geometry of tear shapes.
It's wild.
The blood cells themselves warped into teardrops in response to the vibrational frequency of grief.
It connects right back to the tuning fork and the cymatics plate. Your conscious mind vibrates with the frequency of sadness. That electromagnetic energy transfers through the conductive medium of your nervous system and your blood plasma, and your cellular membranes literally resonate into that shape. You are dictating the geometry of your own biology.
And crucially, when the subjects shifted their emotional state, when they practiced deep prayer, meditation, or genuine gratitude, the cells responded almost immediately. They regained their negative charge, detached from the clumps, and returned to normal, free-flowing, perfectly round, glowing spheres.
The electromagnetic field of the cell was restored by the high-frequency vibration of gratitude.
So we have definitively established that your thoughts, your emotions, and your voice alter your own blood, your own bone density, and your own cellular architecture. But this raises the ultimate question. Does your vibrational influence stop at the boundary of your skin?
Right. If you are a biological tuning fork and your cells are responding, what happens to the other tuning forks sitting in the room with you?
This brings us to the final and perhaps most consequential aspect of the law of vibration, the social and spatial impact, the realm of mental induction and contagion. To understand the mechanics of this, we turn to the writings of William Walker Atkinson, particularly his book, Practical Mental Influence.
Atkinson anchors his metaphysical theory in a physiological reality. Intense thought requires metabolic energy. Physiologists know that deep concentration and intense emotion cause a literal burning up of brain matter and a spike in glucose consumption.
Exactly. Your brain is not a closed system. Just as a battery generates an electrical field through a chemical reaction, your brain generates a high vibratory electromagnetic field through the metabolic consumption of brain matter. Atkinson argues that this energy does not neatly stop at your skull. It emanates outward into the ether as thought waves.
And just like light waves from a star or ripples in a pond, these electromagnetic thought waves travel outward and persist in the environment long after the initial thought has passed.
And this is where we can apply the physics textbook directly to human psychology. In physics, we have electrical induction. If you run an electric current through a wire, it generates a magnetic field. If you place a second, completely unattached wire inside that magnetic field, the field will induce an electrical current to flow in the second wire.
Atkinson calls the human equivalent mental induction. Our concentrated thought waves leave our brain and induce sympathetic vibrations in the neural architecture of the people around us.
It perfectly explains the mechanics behind everyday social phenomena. Think about the contagion of panic in a crowded theater, or anger in a mob. One or two individuals begin vibrating with intense, survival-level terror or fury. They broadcast a massive, low-frequency, high-amplitude thought wave.
Through mental induction, that wave sweeps through the crowd, inducing the exact same frequency in the nervous systems of the people around them. It overrides their rational, prefrontal cortex, and suddenly you have a synchronized riot.
Or conversely, consider the overwhelming euphoric emotion at a massive music festival or a religious revival. The collective frequency of thousands of people focused on devotion or joy creates an inductive field so powerful it practically sweeps you off your feet the moment you enter the venue.
Or even on a micro scale. Walking into a business office, you've definitely experienced this. You walk into one office and immediately you feel this wide awake, alert, collaborative energy. You walk into another office, and before anyone even makes eye contact with you, you feel a heavy dread, suspicion, or deep lethargy.
It's in the air.
It is quite literally in the air. The manager of that office is likely sending out a dominant, continuous thought wave of stress or micromanagement. The employees' nervous systems are entrained to that frequency, and they begin broadcasting it back. When you walk in, your own mental tuning fork is struck by their overlapping waves.
But Atkinson points out that we are not entirely at the mercy of this. We can harness it. Most people are completely unaware of their energetic output. They are broadcasting weak, scattered, contradictory, lazy thought waves. It's just background static. But highly influential people, charismatic leaders, and successful communicators use a technique Atkinson calls mental concentration and mental imaging.
The analogy Atkinson uses is the mental magic lantern. Think of an old-school slide projector. If your mind is the lantern, the light source, then your focused desire or your clear mental image is the slide you place in front of the light. When you focus with intense concentration, you gather all that scattered static into a single, coherent laser beam.
You project that clear geometric image outward. And because it is highly coherent, it easily imprints onto the blank, receptive screens of other people's minds.
That is how historically great or terrifying leaders operate. The sources mention Julius Caesar, who was worshipped by his men not just for his strategy, but for his sheer physical magnetism. And there is the incredible historically verified account of Napoleon Bonaparte escaping from his exile on the island of Elba.
That story is the ultimate display of vibratory dominance.
It really is.
Napoleon lands back in France with just a small group of loyalists. The King of France sends a massive, fully armed regiment of soldiers to intercept and capture him. The two forces meet. Napoleon steps out in front of his men, completely unarmed, opens his coat, and walks directly toward the opposing army.
Unbelievable.
He doesn't beg. He doesn't negotiate. He projects his authority with such intense, concentrated vibratory force, what Atkinson calls fascination, that the opposing soldiers are physically overwhelmed. They drop their weapons, break ranks, and begin weeping and cheering for him to lead them.
Mechanically speaking, he induced a phase lock. His frequency of absolute, unwavering authority was so dominant, so highly concentrated, that the weaker, conflicted frequencies of the soldiers simply collapsed. Their tuning forks had no choice but to vibrate at his pitch.
Okay, but this raises a slightly terrifying question for everyday life. If everyone is walking around broadcasting their thoughts, and a strong, concentrated will can just override a weak one, how do we protect ourselves? Why aren't we just overwhelmed by a million competing signals all the time? If my boss is projecting a heavy wave of anxiety, am I just a victim of their mental magic lantern?
It's a vital question, and the mechanics of physics provide the answer. Wave neutralization and phase cancellation. First, opposing waves can cancel each other out. If a wave of intense hostility meets a wave of intense compassion, they will clash, and the stronger amplitude will diminish the weaker. But more importantly, you protect yourself by actively cultivating a high vibrational baseline.
Explain how that acts as a shield.
If you maintain a mental and physiological atmosphere of high vibration, through continuous gratitude, taking time to regulate your nervous system, grounding yourself in nature, and practicing positive cognition, your bioelectric field becomes highly coherent and dense. You literally become immune to lower frequencies because of the law of resonance. A tuning fork calibrated to 500 Hz will not resonate if hit by a 50 Hz wave. It simply ignores it. Good attracts good. Coherence repels chaos. By keeping your own frequency high, the lower vibrations of fear, anger, or manipulation from others simply pass through your field without finding a corresponding receptor to resonate with.
You essentially encrypt your signal. The ultimate self-defense isn't building walls. It's radical positivity and maintaining impeccable energetic hygiene. You have to become the dominant tuning fork in your own life so that you are inducing harmony in others rather than absorbing their static.
Exactly. You stabilize the environment around you.
Let's synthesize this epic journey. We started with the ancient Hermetic wisdom of the Kybalion, claiming the universe is an ocean of motion. And we've learned that this is not just a spiritual buzzword, it is the literal architecture of reality. Vibration is the physical tuning fork transferring invisible acoustic energy across a room. It's the violent shaking of a platform that tricks human bone cells into halting their own destruction. It's the standing waves of sound that organize chaos into geometry, the harmonics of the human voice shattering rigid cancer cells, and the emotions that dictate whether our blood flows freely or clumps in grief. And finally, it is the invisible electromagnetic induction of our thoughts that allows us to change the emotional temperature of a room before we even speak a word.
And the practical application for you, the listener, is paramount. You are not a passive victim of your environment. You are the architect of your own frequency. If you are feeling stuck, depressed, or physically lethargic, remember the biological mechanics we've discussed. You have the power to manually intervene. Expose yourself to coherent sound frequencies. Walk barefoot in the grass to ground your bioelectrical field with the Earth's natural resonance. Or simply, consciously, do the hard work of changing the physiological emotion behind your repetitive thoughts. You control the dial.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought to mull over. Atkinson noted that because thought waves are electromagnetic energy, they persist in a physical space long after the person who generated them has left the room. They imprint on the physical environment. Every house, every office, every bedroom has an atmosphere built by the accumulated vibrational residue of its inhabitants.
The physical space absorbs the mental energy.
Exactly. So look around the room you're sitting in right now. Take a deep breath. Based on the thoughts you've been thinking lately, the emotions you've been entertaining, the fears you've been repeating, what kind of invisible architecture are you leaving behind for the next person who walks through the door? Are you filling the space with anxiety and static? Or are you adding to that beautiful, harmonious ocean of motion?